Utawarerumono Zan, or Zan, or Utawario. You know what? It's been a long time since we've talked about this franchise on this channel, and I could have, or rather should have, learned how to pronounce the name of the game within that time. But long story short, I didn't. So like before, you're just gonna have to deal with my pronunciation here, and I'm going to call it Utawarerumono Zan. Feel free to correct the pronunciation in the comments below. I know many of you wouldn't help yourselves even if I asked you to, but chances are next time we have to talk about this, it's going to remain a lesson unlearned, so you've been warned. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Utawarerumono Zan is the latest release in the Utawarerumono franchise. Yes, that's right, this is a franchise. A niche one, but a franchise nonetheless. Developed by Tamsoft and Aquaplus and localized and published by NIS America in North America for the PlayStation 4, this game serves as the biggest departure from the original Utawarerumono formula to date. And before we continue, thank you NIS America for providing the review code for this game. Utawarerumono Zan is kind of halfway between being a spin-off and a mainline entry in the series. It's a retelling of the events of Utawarerumono Mask of Deception in a hyper-condensed format. However, the intermittent strategy RPG sections of the original game are now played out in the signature Tamsoft hack-and-slash style. Unlike my normal reviews, we're going to start this one by looking at the gameplay rather than the story. If you've played any Tamsoft hack-and-slash games before, like Senran Kagura Shinobi Versus for example, you know roughly what to expect. These are very much Musou titles, or rather Warriors games. Every battle takes place in a relatively small adventure map where you run from one destination to the next, completing objectives like kill X amount of enemy, find X item, arrive at X location, so on and so forth. Along the way, massive hordes of enemies will spawn for you to take out in a blitz of glitz and glam. Like usual for Tamsoft combat, it's satisfying but not without its jank. Combos are simple, mainly consisting of square for light attacks and triangle for heavy. Holding either button at any point in a combo will create a larger attack, and you of course have buttons to dash and jump, which can all be used to extend combos and create new combo chains. I couldn't find a block button while I was playing, and I will say that I did definitely miss it. At certain times in battle, you can cast chain attacks, or manually instruct your teammates to cast them if you have them ready. Chain attacks must be set prior to battle, and only 2 per character can be equipped at a time. These are special attacks you get through leveling up. There aren't too many different chain attacks per character, but with the amount of characters to mess with, you won't find their limitations that stifling. When casting a chain attack, you get additional prompts in the form of these circles here. Successfully pressing circle every time the inner ring meets the outer ring will launch truer and more powerful forms of the chain attack. These aren't the easiest to pull off. With how much is going on at any time, it can be really hard to keep track of your markers. Some chain attacks also have prompts that appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. When action gets really crazy, the game will sometimes slow down, and this can and will throw you off. Granted, some of this slowdown is intentional for cinematic effect, but it isn't always. There's a good handful of characters to choose from, and in most stages you'll get to bring 4 of them into battle at a time. Using the D-pad, you can switch between them on the fly. So if you're not really feeling the character you were defaulted to for the story mission, you can always switch to one of your backups. Each character plays and feels very different, and this is where I get most of my fun out of these kinds of games. And it's also where I feel most of the jankiness comes from. Tamsoft is always trying new things with character builds and forms of combat. This makes some characters really tough to adjust to and almost unwieldy feeling. But no matter what, it always ends up feeling like an interesting endeavor. This girl here, I believe her name is pronounced Rulete? I'm just not too sure about that, but this girl here with her bird I found incredibly tough to get used to. She is rather powerful, but her combos take her all over the place. This is one I found personally to be a bit unwieldy, but one that I also feel somebody else could really get the hang of and really gravitate to. The twins here I also found tough to get used to, but ultimately ended up being some of my favorite characters. Most of their attacks are done from a standstill, but if you position yourself well enough to your enemies, you can really do some damage. This guy here was also one of my favorites, where some of his attacks, he pretty much disappears into his weapon and reappears when the weapon reaches its destination. These characters are always fun to just mess around with and try to figure out how to make them work. If the more experimental characters don't do it for you though, we got plenty of more streamlined ones. And if you absolutely wanted, you could beat every level with just a couple characters of your choosing. It's rare that you're forced into any situation where you have to use characters you just can't get into. Over the course of battle, characters do level up, but the biggest difference in stats won't come from leveling alone. First off, we have scrolls. Scrolls affect character stats directly, and once you acquire them, you need only slot them into an equip slot. These are mostly acquired through the upgrade menu, which is really just an RNG store. You go in with money, you spend the money, and the game runs some numbers and randomizes some prizes. Sometimes you get scrolls, sometimes you get new costumes. It's completely up to chance. RNG equipment is kind of lame, but the game is easy enough that it doesn't really become a frustration. In the entire story mode, I only came across one difficulty spike that halted my progress at all, and that was at the second last stage. If you do find things tough, there are extra missions and bonus challenges you can access from the main menu that will level up your characters at a faster than normal rate. Each character also gains BP at the end of each stage, which can be used to upgrade stats manually in a small handful of categories. Every category that you upgrade with BP will have a star in at least one slot. These stars will grant you special rewards when you level up to that slot, but otherwise it's all pretty self-explanatory. Through completing in-game challenges such as large combos or kill counts, you'll also gain military medals. Once you have the medals, you visit the military medals menu to exchange them for prizes. There aren't too many of these, but it's a good incentive to work towards new goals. But that's really it for combat, characters, and leveling. What's here is light and a little bit jank, but oddly satisfying, at least for me. A couple things that I did find hard to get used to though. As I said before, I didn't come across any real block button. That threw me off, but I adjusted quick. What I didn't get used to was the lack of a double jump. And without double jump, proper aerial combos kind of disappear as well. In a Tamsoft game, this just feels weird. The jump heights are so dwarfed compared to what I'm used to. And it's not like this game needs to be like their other games. If anything, it has more of a personal identity than most, and that's a good thing. But in games like this, double jumps and aerial combos feel like such a normal and expected part of the formula that playing without them is just strange. Otherwise, yeah, it's Tamsoft, it's action, it's hack and slash fun. Now let's move on to the tough or otherwise weird part, the story. I mentioned that this was a hyper-condensed retelling of the events of Mask of Deception, and I don't want that statement to be taken lightly. When I first heard of this game, I thought it'd be a great way to get new players into the series. However, after playing it, it feels more like a companion piece to Deception than anything else. Without the original game to use as a frame of reference, this one's narrative almost completely falls apart. Some plot points are condensed to the point where it feels like you're only getting bullet points of the original story, and even then, subplots are completely removed, as are some of the characters. Some events along the way are underexplained to the point I can only imagine new players wouldn't fully be able to grasp what's going on, and if they did grasp it, understanding why some things are important is nearly impossible. For illustrative purposes, let's look at the character Oshter. He, of course, appears in Zan as well as Deception. Only in Deception, his true identity is a matter of great importance. In Zan, his true identity is exposed within 4 seconds of his introduction. That's how fast we move through plot points here. The first 10 hours of Mask of Deception is broken down to about 4 minutes in Zan. In short, Zan is about a character named Haku. Haku awakes absent any memories. He awakes in a strange and foreign world wherein he is the only true human. He's rescued by a girl named Kuan, who then takes him in and protects him. As Kuan travels the world, they keep their eyes open for any clue or trace of where Haku may have come from and where he may belong. However, his amnesia and his mystery become subplot almost immediately as they meet new characters and get mixed up with their problems. Some of these characters are from high-ranking political positions and others are just lowly bandits, but each one comes with their own set of pressing issues that only grow as the game goes along and political strife rises, threatening to create all-out war between countries. As great or interesting as some of that might sound, again, the problem here is pace and how condensed the plot is. This is the same story told in Mask of Deception, only in that game the story takes place over roughly 60 hours, the vast majority of which was visual novel content. Here, the entire story is condensed to 6. Yes, the entire story is condensed to 6 hours. Granted, I did criticize Utawarerumono Mask of Deception for having a bit too much filler, but there certainly wasn't 54 hours of filler. Characters here are introduced handfuls at a time. It's hard to get a bead on who anybody is, where they're from, or what they're there for. Some of the characters and events do get adequate screen time, but the vast majority do not. If I had nothing but this game to go on, there's a good chance I wouldn't understand the story's logical progression at all. It feels more like playing a movie tie-in game from the early 2000s, where you don't see all the scenes between the action set pieces. You just get the 1 minute before a stage begins, and if you're lucky, you get the 1 minute after. It's like you're already expected to know what's going on. You can still tell while playing the game that the game has an incredible world and some great characters. The characters' personalities are localized and translated particularly well. It's just sad that only the surface of this world is explored, and it's done so in such a haphazard way. If you are going to play this because maybe you just like the look of the combat and the character designs, I implore you, if at all, at any point, you feel like you want to know more about the world and find any of it intriguing at all, please consider playing the original. It's mostly a visual novel with a bit of SRPG thrown in from time to time, but the world building and characters are simply incredible, and they've kind of been done a disservice here. Now, just a few more things before we close out. The music! During the intro, we have some cool Breath of the Wild feeling stuff with some light piano playing over some environmental sounds. Moving more into the actual gameplay, some of the OST feels a little like Toho music, but with a bit more traditional inspirations. Overall, the OST's pretty good. The sound effects are pretty stock stuff for Tamsoft. I mean, there's nothing to complain about here. Voiceovers are Japanese only and just as good as they were before. Nothing grating, but if you don't like, let's say, this guy's character, he might annoy you a bit. Thankfully for me, I think he's quite hilarious. Then again, sometimes I also think Jar Jar Binks is hilarious, so take that for what it's worth. The visuals are kind of all over the place. This game was developed from the ground up for the PlayStation 4, and that does show, but the developer's history of handheld games also shows. Some of the textures are pretty muddy, but then some are pretty nice. Like this wooden post here, just look at that nice wooden post. Or maybe don't. YouTube's compression probably isn't doing it any favors. The models in the game are fairly average anime models, but they do the trick just fine. The 2D art is fantastic, but then it's all reused art from Mask of Deception anyway, so it's nothing I personally haven't seen before. Performance definitely suffers with dropping frame rates in battle from time to time. The frenetic action and button mashy nature of everything makes it easy enough to ignore, but if accuracy were a bigger concern, this could have had far worse consequences. As it is, it mostly just messes up some chain attacks. Some oddities happen here and there. I think I may have fallen through the floor once here, and I'm pretty sure I'm seeing the inside of my head here, but instances like this were rare at best. The game's UI looks mostly okay, and for the most part, some work was put into it. But some of the work I could actually do without. Outlining the font in the same color as the dialogue window just doesn't seem like a great idea. It just doesn't look nice. A simple black outline would have been fine, but that's a nitpick at the very best. But that's about it. This is essentially Utawarerumono Mask of Deception, ungracefully molded into the shape of a Tamsoft game and renamed to Utawarerumono Zan. It bears all the hallmarks of a Tamsoft game. The jank, the odd gambling store mechanics, the strangely satisfying Musou action, but sadly they lost the strongest hallmarks of an Uta game. The world, the characters, the compelling narrative. This game is mostly for Uta fans, but Uta fans would probably buy it regardless of review, as we all want the best for this niche little franchise. If you're not a fan of the franchise already, only buy this if you're somebody who likes Tamsoft Musous, or if you're somebody who plans to skip all of the story, or at the very least, if you have no problem not fully getting the story. Some of the sequences, as I said before, are fully fleshed out, and they're pretty nice. It's just that most of them aren't, which makes this a rather tough sell. Did I hate the game? No, not at all. In fact, I had fun. It's just that, even coming from the perspective of a fan, I was having trouble keeping up with the story and found how they handled it to be rather disappointing. It's not the end of the world, the original Uta games still exist and will likely continue to exist going forward. It's just a missed opportunity. A missed opportunity that could have made this fun game into a fun, memorable game, rather than a fun, disposable one. And that's all I'm going to say on Utawarerumono Zan. If you guys like the video, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all my socials and my Patreon are in the description below. And as always, folks, thanks for watching.